Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second session of the People's Health Hearing. My name is Sophie, and together with Amit, I'll be facilitating the space today. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm active with Health for Future. So to those of you joining for the first time today, welcome. And to those who are back, welcome back. I'll be running through some technical matters and some ground rules for our space. So the People's Health Hearing seeks to bear witness to the public health impacts of extractive industries, create a space that connects people's struggles, and set out a vision for intersectional transformative climate justice. It is a space for movement building, connecting health and climate activists across the globe, and laying the roots for ongoing organizing. We already heard today, and we will hear more people and communities at the front lines of extractivism share testimonies of how these industries are devastating people's health, share stories of hope, and how communities are resisting. Weaving together the testimonies, the hearing will close with reflections from listeners who will bring in their own experience of resistance and organizing as part of the wider health and climate justice movements. So just to set out the intentions for our hearing today, this hearing seeks to be part of ongoing organizing. We are holding the space, but we also know that we can't do everything in one day. However, it's an ongoing struggle that we are all part of. Great, thank you very much. And with this, we move on to our first testimony. I'm very happy to introduce our first speaker. John Leo is the Deputy Executive Director for Programs and Campaigning of Living Laudato Philippines and a member of the interim Secretariat of Aksyon Klima, Pilipinas. He's a citizen journalist and has focused on climate and environmental stories since 2016, being published in international and local media platforms. He's also an environment researcher and science communicator, having contributed to award-winning studies and reports on climate and the environment in the Philippines. So over to you, John Leo, and so glad that we have you here today.
Thank you, Sophie and Amit, and a good morning, good afternoon, evening, to all of you, wherever you may be in the world. I hope you're staying safe. And for those who are also here in Glasgow for COP26, I hope you're staying extra safe. So my name is John Leo AlgoJu. I'm JL for short. I'm from the Philippines, and I am a climate and environment advocate working for Living Laudato Philippines. It's an organization that is founded on the 3rd anniversary of the landfall of Super Typhoon Haiyan, which actually is today. Today will be the 6th or 8th anniversary. Sorry, my math is not so good. But today is the anniversary of the landfall of Super Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, which inspired the formation of our organization, LLS. Haiyan was a very tragic event, as it truly opened the eyes of not just Filipinos, but many people around the world, the extent of how climate change can impact lives in a matter of a second or in the blink of an eye, quite frankly. And there is no denying, of course, that climate justice is one of the most important issues, not just for us in civil society in the Philippines, but even with our government representatives here at COP26. Of course, you can also deny that the science is very clear about the origins of the climate crisis being burned fossil fuels. And as part of our work here in the Philippines for LLS, Aksyon, Klima, Pilipinas, and others, one of our main goals is to encourage, or rather pressure, major Philippine financial institutions, banks, corporations, and of course even our brothers and sisters in faith-based organizations to divest their assets from environmentally harmful activities, and that of course is coal, major fossil fuel. And through our engagements in LLS, we have interacted with communities that live near coal-fired power plants in different parts of the country. And we've interacted with them, and we've learned about their struggles when it comes to dealing not only with the pollution that comes out of coal-fired power plants, but also their treatment from the operators of such facilities and the injustices, the harm, the suffering that they have had to endure for years or even decades in some cases. And their experiences, their voices are among those that we try to carry with us as we engage here in Glasgow for the 2-week climate summit. And as part of my testimony for today, I have written a very short poem, just 1 to 2 minutes, that was inspired by the stories that I've heard from the communities that live near coal-fired power plants, how they have had to endure so much and yet stay resilient and hopeful that things will turn for the better. And that starts, of course, with us working together, all of us, in order to resolve the climate crisis. And that starts by addressing the root of the problem. And that is, of course, on the surface, the burning of fossil fuels. And if you look and we dive deeper into that root of the climate crisis, we try to address the human greed and apathy. So I wrote this poem and I call it Forgotten but Not Done. And allow me to end my testimony by reading this short poem for all of you. Here we go. Forgotten but not done. People are crying. Our world is screaming. Hear us out and listen and stop your daydream. Are you ignorant or just ignoring our voices? Shouldn't you think of the effects of your choices? Every breath we take is a dose of poison out to drive the air off our lungs without question. Until the eternal night dawns upon our eyes, the body and spirit burn, buried in hazy skies. Far from the smokestacks and over our heads, 1 degree of separation it has bred, smaller than the width of a suit-covered hair, strong enough to turn dreams to a living nightmare. In depending on the remains of days gone by, lies nothing but grief and deluded minds. Forgive us if we won't just sit by and watch under the noise and the chaos of your dispatch. Every word we say comes with the ultimate catch. But living like this is not worth your false promises. Stand up for those who have piled up their losses. Remember the high stakes, especially for us. Into the blissful unknown, one truth is a must. Gifted with this vaccine to curb this distrust, how can we not use it to bring limitless light to our world decaying from a cancerous flight? No wealth can replace the meaning of life or withstand the wrath of nature born of strife. We may have been forgotten, but we'll never. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. That was really impactful, especially the poem at the end. I mean, I had shared it myself, and I can see the room around me as well. It was just everyone was listening so actively. So we really, really do appreciate that. Next up, we have Hans, who's from Uganda, and he's passionate about activism, especially around climate, poverty, and health, and the intersectional issues that arise from them. Working with climate operations has allowed him to move around to see firsthand the effects of so many issues, but also to think up ways to mitigate them and act on that as well. So I'll pass it over to Hans now.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon and good evening from where everybody's joining in from. My name is Hans. I'm from Uganda, a small East African country. I've had the opportunity to move around, especially with organizations such as FHI 360 and Uganda Youth and Adolescent Health Forum, mainly working around sexual reproductive health rights. And I've seen so much in the community in regards to people's health, but it wasn't until I started working with climate operation that everything just clicked. From the migration that I used to document for the previous organizations and now with climate operation, from the migration, from the health consequences and everything just clicked. It showed the intersectionality between health and climate. Uganda, where I'm based right now, is heavily agro-based. So our economy is heavily dependent on seasons and constant seasons. But wherever I seem to go, people seem to be complaining about one thing: the seasons have changed, livelihoods have been changed. While the consequences of climate are not directly as diverse or as dire, like for countries like Australia or the Philippines with their typhoons, Australia's wildfires, and the floods recently in Europe. The effects of climate change right now are being felt on health and financial, and in the financial sector. People's livelihoods are being decimated because of prolonged droughts. And if people cannot feed, if people cannot grow food, people have often left. The ones that tend to stay tend to be left with extreme diverse conditions. For example, because they have to survive on a few drought-resistant crops. This sets in dire health conditions, malnutrition, and in a few rare occasions, neglected tropical diseases. These are things that shouldn't be happening right now, but they are happening, which is a direct link to climate. This has indirectly, I would say, directly or indirectly set about greenwashing by the companies that, for example, here that are directly responsible, together with the government. For example, right now the country is, if you tune to any radio station or TV, you'll find campaigns about planting trees, about banning polythene bags because they are bad for the environment. But it's the companies that are literally funding, together with the government, literally funding what's causing the main problems that are greenwashing everything. For example, there's a new pipeline being built it's running through game parks, it's running through an entire lake, and it's being funded by Total, which is a huge petroleum and gas company, a 20 billion project. But at the same time, this is the same company that is planting trees. It's all over, it's plastered everywhere that we're doing the most that we can for the environment. But at the same time, they're investing this massive amount of money into mining more oil and gas. And at the same time, the government is on board with this, and it's putting up massive subsidies for companies that are doing this, and not necessarily trying to mitigate, not necessarily trying to find out what is causing the change in climate or the change in why people are migrating, or why so many underlying and intersecting problems are coming up. So throughout the time I've moved around with climate operation and the photos we've taken and the communities that we've been working with, and in my lifetime, it is just so interesting to see that so much has happened in such a little time. And usually these communities have their own tailor-made solutions that sometimes are not put into account. But however, if they were put into account, for example, nobody tends to face a crisis and not want to solve it. So these communities tend to have their own solutions. So my call to action would be, if we paid attention to what these communities have to offer, and then put more effort, put more resources into trying to solve problems with their tailor-made solutions and to scale them, I believe we would do so much more than jumping on board with the government and oil and gas companies' whitewash campaigns. I believe it would go a further long way to mitigate so many of the problems coming up because of climate and directly affecting people's health. Thank you, and that is what I had to say.
Thank you so much, Hans, for this really powerful testimonial and really, again, showing the power of communities. That was really powerful. Thank you so much. Before we move on to our next speaker, we have a Menti prepared for you, where you can put where you're coming from, so that we can see which places people are joining all over the world. So you can go to menti.com and use the code that is put on the screen, and then you can put your little dot where you're coming from, so we can see where people are tuning in. And it's very lovely to see that from the first session it was already really from all the time zones participation. So that's really amazing. Thank you very much. Great. With that, we will be moving on to our next speaker, which is Simone. Simone is a climate justice campaigner, activist, and educator who has contributed to environmental, social, and cultural work in Bristol, London, and across the UK. Simone has worked on air pollution, divestment, and direct action campaigns. She currently uses facilitated workshops to explore climate colonialism and examples of climate resistance and movements from the past and present day. Simone currently organizes with Air UK Collective. Welcome, Simone. We're looking forward to your testimonial.
Hey everyone. Oh, sorry, I sound so hoarse. I hope you're all well. I'm Simone. My pronouns are she, her, and yeah, just a little bit about myself. I worked on divestment campaigns. I organise with Air UK Collective, and yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and thank you to Race and Health for having me and everyone for coming. I'm always conscious about talking about what I do, and I want to make it clear that whilst I do things alone and collectively, I have to remind myself and all of us working on social change, especially in the age of the climate crisis, to look carefully at how we're working together rather than just what we're personally working on. And if our movements are gonna withstand the kind of storms and floods and fires, and not just in an ecological sense or an environment sense, we need to be thinking about how we work together and where are our weak spots, what is holding us back from seeing other people's struggles, and how do we build these connections in the long term as well. And I guess going on from that, I'm going to talk a little bit about tackling climate justice and linking it to kind of abolitionist thought and action, and hopefully bringing in some of my experiences, but also others across the globe. So what abolition and climate justice is, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore from the US, who's an abolitionist thinker and a prison abolitionist, says that abolition is about presence and not absence. It's about building life-affirming institutions. So when we think about building back better and differently, we can't view abolition and climate justice as separate. Both teach us that learning and unlearning are ongoing processes of imagining and collectively organizing and collective action. Both require us to approach the current systems that seek to exploit and dominate people in the planet, and think about how we carve the space for something new and different, something that allows us all to live and survive. And our fight for climate justice must stretch kind of beyond the physical effects of environment or climate change. And whilst this is integral to our fight, the social aspect of climate change cannot be separated from this. Black, Indigenous, people of colour across the globe are continuing and contributing the least to climate change, yet bear the most responsibility for the consequences. And when I say that our fight for climate must stretch beyond the physical, I mean it in this sense. I mean it in the sense that the current framing around climate change says that we've got 12 years left, or we've got some time, when in reality it's over 500 years of violence and domination and exploitation of Black, Indigenous, people of colour and the globe. So when we talk about it being a physical, going beyond the physical, it means that the systems that set us up for this kind of disposability and death over profits, power and resource hoarding, it's also a fight against our violent borders, our penalizing criminal justice system, our prison system, policing, the military, the fossil fuel industry, the profiting like security, arms and border companies, our workers' rights being compromised, our lack of access to resources as migrants, as working class people, as women, as queer and trans people, as Black, Indigenous people of color, as disabled people, as people constantly trying to survive. We are saying enough is enough. And like climate justice in the context of abolition requires us to remove these systems entirely, not just kind of manage their details more fairly, or not to shuffle the positions, because we can like get rid of an oppressive system and step straight back into it, right? So it's not about who inflicts and who endures, and it's not about maintaining this system and reforming it. It's rather abolition speaks to the only way to rectify the harms of these systems caused is to get rid of them. And I kind of want to speak more to like, well, how do we do this? And like, how do we work together? And like at its core, abolition and climate justice is people-centered. It's a world where we understand and value our interconnectedness. Liberation doesn't just mean fulfilling the desires that we have today, but expanding what our sense of what is possible. And like all of us here gathered today realize that more is possible than the world that we currently live in. It's an eradication of oppressive systems that like keep us from seeing and relating to each other and working together. It's building forms of belonging and ownership that are not predicated on like exclusion, but rather, and also don't play into forms of legitimacy created and regulated by the same systems that seek to divide us and confine our empathy. It's creating safe, healthy, green and loving societies based on community care, trust, accountability and radical love. And like, I've got some steps. This is the last bit of how we do this. So how do we do this? We, one, step in. We are sitting on the shoulders of our ancestors, climate and social activists, movement builders, abolitionist thinkers, the movers and shakers that came before us and are also beside us. When we saw like Palestinian organizers exchanging skills and education on tear gas and weapons used on Palestinian people, to Black Panther and Black liberation organizers in the US, we saw our internationalist histories playing out. When Angela Davis said, we're not free until Palestine is free, we see the solidarity at work. We see that internationalism is integral to our movements. Two, we get educated to understand not only that the theory behind these systems, but how they manifest in practice, not just locally to our shores, but across the world in their different contexts. We educate to understand movements before us, what worked well, what we can learn from. We get educated to connect the dots between our struggles and educate to critically organize for better futures. And like an example is during the resistance against Shell in Ogoni land, the Federation of Ogoni Women's Association helped to mobilize 300,000 people for marches against Shell. And like they, alongside doing that incredible work, they also like actively supervised children at marches, upskilled women with skills and education so they could find better work, and actively went into communities to speak to women about what was happening with Shell and Ogoni land, how it was affecting the Ogoni people, and how to protest and encouraging them to join. This is the kind of patience, commitment and care needed within our climate and abolitionist movements to not only educate people, but bring them on board and empower them to organize and protest. Number three, we get creative. Some of the first things to go in oppressive regimes is arts and culture. This is deliberate and seeks to stifle our histories, resistance, and legacy being passed on. To be creative in the fight for climate justice and abolition means we find new ways of showing up for each other and stick it actually to the power structures that keep us apart. It's blockading immigration bans, it's defending ourselves against the police and military, it's community food programs, it's holding space for each other, it's collectively problem solving, it's using our means to reach far beyond our local through social media, connecting at global events, just like this. We must honor the creative histories and movements that have got us to this point, and we must take that legacy further. Number four, we get together. No change has been ever achieved by itself or alone, and our future needs all of us. So join an organizing group. Most of your learning, questions, comrades, and understanding will work in tandem with others. Be a part of your own and others' growing process. Where you can dedicate time, resource, skills, and joy, please join an organizing group that keeps you hopeful and keeps you there in the long term. This can be anything from like Palestine solidarity to climate justice organizing, to migrants justice organizing, to housing justice, to decolonization, to air pollution, land defending, prison abolitioning, food justice, literally anything. and anything within that organizing, see the ways that your goals line up with other organizing groups and where you can work together. And then number 5, second to last, we organize with an openness to change and disruption. When we're confronting our current roles and working towards a liberated future, this will disrupt our daily lives, potential comforts in our countries, our governance, our access, literally everything. And while the new may feel uncomfortable, we should not revert back to our world as it is because of our comfortability or fear that we lose out in the process. Often what we think is comforting is just a facade. It keeps us from organizing. They hand our liberation to us in breadcrumbs when we're really here to take the whole cake and be liberated. I say this particularly speaking as someone from the UK, and perhaps this extends to other Western or global North countries. Our discomfort from disruptive action is perhaps not getting into work or a train delay or a flight cancelling, as compared to famine, flooding, drought that is sweeping across the globe. Many of the movements we hold in our hearts as radicalizing us and getting us to this point and bringing us the privileges that we today kind of benefit from were born from disruption of the status quo. From the civil rights movement to climate marches, to the Soweto school uprisings, to the Stansted 15, to the women climate defenders in Colombia. Octavia Butler, who is incredible, says that change is the only constant, and we're more compassionate and adaptable than what our current circumstances and this world will allow us for sometimes. And we must think of the bigger picture and how our present discomforts and adversity to change stop us from seeing the bigger picture and seeing those who are facing sharper violence from these global systems and climate breakdown. And an example I'll bring in is Black Lives Matter UK did a action where they stopped the expansion of City Airport in London, and essentially they were doing this not just to tackle air pollution faced by Black people in the area, but also against it was for migrants' justice as well, and to stop the expansion of detention centres and also the deportation of migrants who have come to the UK for safer lives. And it was also in protest or global solidarity protests with other people defending climate change or defending climate justice in their own lands. So that's just another example of how we can be working together and also spotlighting other movements that are alike to ours. And then finally, I want to say that we work in solidarity, not occasionally and not when we feel like it, but routinely and committedly. For many of us in the UK, for example, we don't see or feel the brunt of the violence many of the companies based here enact elsewhere. There's an example of hosting arms fairs in London, where it's a huge expensive event where they're weapons of war essentially, and it happens every year. And what we don't know here is that these weapons are then directly shipped across the world to oppressed Palestinians and indigenous climate defenders in Brazil and Colombia, India and Nigeria for civil war and also imperialism. When groups across the world call for solidarity, we must commit with care, diligence and an understanding that this is how we all get free. And to end, I kind of want to leave you all with a quote by the abolitionist thinker and just amazing babe, Mariam Kaba, who says, "Hope is a discipline and we must practice it daily." And when we practice this collectively and try to collectively imagine and organize and fight for our now and future, when we choose to imagine a new future, we must dream big and we must not tell ourselves that it's unattainable. When we show the world, when we show the impossible is possible by taking action, we edge just a little bit closer to creating the world that we actually want to see. Another world is possible, another world is happening, and hope is an unwavering practice and belief that this will be done for us and by us. Thank you for listening, and thank you to the other speakers as well. You were amazing.
Thank you so much, Simone. That was really, really powerful. I think everyone here, and I'm sure everyone listening as well in general, I mean, I feel so empowered just hearing everything that you said, the way you broke down the system and the crisis that we're facing and how we need to work together and mobilize ourselves as a community rather than as individuals was really, really powerful. And I'm really going to take on those 6 points that you mentioned personally myself. So yeah, thank you so much. Our next speaker is Julia Avila, who's a biologist and has a master in ecology. She's also doing a PhD at the minute in botany at the National Institute of Amazonian Research, working with riverine populations in Middle Solimoes, investigating the impacts of climate change on the livelihoods of local populations. Julia is an external researcher at the Mamirao Sustainable Development Institute. I'll pass it on to you, Julia. Thank you. Julia, I think you're muted.
Okay, now it's working. Thank you. So thank you a lot. I will just share my screen here. Just 1 second. So thank you a lot for the presentation and for the opportunity to be here. And I will talk about the impacts of climate change on Amazon traditional population health. And so we know that Amazonia has a huge biodiversity and diversity of fresh water, but it's also home for 33 million people. 70% of that live in urban centers, and 30%, most of all, are local communities, indigenous peoples that have deeper relations with biodiversity and natural sources. So it enables them a long-term occupations on these areas. And in general, they have the primary source of carbohydrates and the manioc cultivation. So we can see on the top of the photo on the top, manioc cultivation and many other fruits that they cultivated at home gardens and other traditional agro-ecoforestry systems. I will be more specifically talking about ribeirinhos, also called riveirinho, that are local communities that historically inhabit the bank of rivers of Amazonia. And the floods and the droughts both are part of the Amazonia flood plain area. So they have 6 months of flood season and 6 months of drought season. And more specifically, I will talk about this region of Brazil that is the Amazonas state in the central Amazon and in the middle Solimões River. So was investigating during 3 years, observing the climate change impacts to ribeirinho communities. And I will share with you the principal points that they recognize as that impact the health. So they are recognizing the frequency and the intensity of extreme climatic events, and where extreme floods are floods that the water go inside the houses. That's not common, and they lose a lot of plants. Many plants die. And it's not totally a new thing that are happening there in Amazonia. So we can see here in this timeline that it was occurring like 1 per decade in the past, but since 2009, it's starting to happen much more recurrent, and in 2015 it was the biggest one.
Sorry, Julia.
And sorry?
Really sorry to interrupt you. I don't think the slides are changing on our screen.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Just thought I'd let you know.
Oh, guys, sorry. Let me try to share again.
We're on slide number 9 right now.
Okay. Now it's working.
If you could try and change the slide again for me.
Okay. Yeah?
Yeah, it's working now. Thank you.
Okay, so I will go. Yeah, I will keep it by this way. So extreme droughts are also occurring a lot in this region. So the rivers at Amazonia is like the root of this population. So it's really hard to go to any place to the city or include to agroecosystems because it's not possible to just go by boat at these areas. And the traditional knowledge match when we compare the scientific data with this traditional knowledge. So we can see in red that the extreme floats that they recognize, and in orange or yellow, the extreme droughts that they recognize, and it's totally matched with the database that we have. So the climate predictability in this region is really important because they need to recognize the climate and how the seasons are going. But then traditional knowledge that includes many signs and indicators in the current climatic situation is not working, and it have a lot of consequences for their livelihood. So I will present the impacts on food production that affected the food sovereignty of these people. Also greater attacks from wild animals, and some diseases and intensification of sanitation problems. So related to impacts on food production, we can see here on the photo on the top that manioc plantation, a sweetened plantation, where that was totally lost because the manioc was not mature and the water from the river just come too fast and too early. So it was not possible to produce manioc flour that's the primary source of carbohydrate in the region. And also many trees here in the home garden that survive for some months, but after the water go down, many of them will die. And they also lose manioc because it's cooked in the soil owing to the higher frequency of heavy rains followed by hot temperatures. And they need to produce the manioc flour to eat manioc, as it's a toxic plant that's not possible to eat with any process. And the manioc flour houses also is flooded by these extreme floods. So some families have like money and organization to construct these manioc flour houses that are floating ones, but it's like one or two per communities. And when a flood is coming, every families are passing by these problems together, and it's not possible to process this manioc. And so independent of they can take the manioc from the soil, sometimes they just lost a lot of maniocs because of that. They cannot process it. There is a lot of plants that survive from the flood, but another problem of extreme flood is because there is much more waves, popularly called banzeiros, and it can disturb the root systems of the plants, and some plants that are not common to die in these extreme floods can die. Also, fire spread is a problem because there is a local sponge that's called kauishi, and that grows in the trunk of the trees, and it crumbles in the water and spreads widely during the flood, and it's deposited when the floods end. It's deposited on the forest vegetation. And kauishi is a high flammable sponge and facilitates a lot of the occurrence of uncontrolled fires, include in agroecosystems. So some families just was without any plant source because of that. Kawashi also causes itchiness and skin allergies. So in the water that they take bath, it's a lot of problem. And fishing is also hard because the fish spread in a large amount of the water. Animal brand, it's a really dramatic situation because they place animals in these traditional hefts that sometimes is protected with roofs, but many of them is just exposed to the climate. And some animals are just totally underwater. And there is much more deaths from disease than wild animals attacks. And so it's really dramatic situations about the traditional food of these people. And related to the droughts, so it's really hard to access the agroecosystems, and they lose a lot of plants because it's totally different distance and possible to, and it's also difficult to sell these products on the city, and without income, they only eat the local food. Related to the greater attacks from the wild animals, so the biggest problems are alligators that are looking in the balconies, doors, and windows of houses during the extreme floods. There is more fatal attacks on dogs that are really important for subsistence hunting of these people. And the alligators, for sure, represent the biggest risk for the health and life of communities members who take a bath on these waters, and especially children that don't have places to play during these extreme floods inside the houses, and many times go swim every day. Yeah, every day they are much more exposed to that. Also increase the occurrence of snakes, spiders, scorpions, and ants that invade the homes and looking for protections. And there is more accidents on children and adults. And related to local disease, yeah, most families don't have bathroom, and some locations have a local community latrine. And during these extreme floods, much communities and communal latrines and areas used by these people are affected by water. And sometimes the water that they get from the rain is not enough, so they need to drink the water from the river. And because of that, many people are contaminated with fecal coliforms and the diseases that cause diarrhea, as giardiasis, amoebiasis, it's really higher in this period. This is also a problem in the droughts, that the rain is not so common as in the summer, that it's not so common as in the winter. So according to Riverin, also they have more problems with fever, flu, and colds. Malaria also is the biggest problems in extreme floods in these areas of black waters, rivers, and also common that is transmitted by mosquitoes. In this COVID-19 situation, it was biggest dramatic situation because in 2021, we have one of the biggest floods in Amazonia. In this area, it was not the biggest one recognized, but was really extreme. And the problem is because with the water going inside the house, sometimes include on the roof, many families have to migrate to homes of relatives and friends who live in highlands, principally on the city. And we can figure it out that in this context, community members migrated to the city represented an additional risk of contamination by COVID-19. So I thank you a lot, the opportunity again. I appreciate it to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia, for this really interesting testimonial and visual insight into the effects for the local population. Before we move on to our next speaker, I would remind you that you can ask questions to all the speakers using the Menti link, the same code that we provided in the beginning, and you can just pop your questions in there, and we will try to forward them either during this live stream or afterwards to our speakers. Great. So with that, I'm moving on to our next speaker, which is Melvin Otieno. Melvin Otieno is a Planetary Health Alliance Next Generation Fellow, working to inspire, advocate, and convene the next generation of planetary health campus ambassadors from around the world, as well as conducts outreach through growing the Planetary Health Eastern Africa Hub. She's an associate team member of Women Leaders for Planetary Health, and she does research on dynamics of environmental geochemistry and health in the Lake Victoria Basin, where she investigates the transfer of micronutrients and potentially toxic elements into the Vietnam Gulf. Gulf, yes. Welcome, Melvin. We are looking very much forward to your testimonial. Melvin might have some connection issues. We wait like some seconds to see if she's there.
Kenya. So I am here also to represent the voices of women and children who are the most vulnerable people affected by climate change. We have also been using us through geography that embodies awareness, and also to further create awareness to the broader community in order to act accordingly behind climate change injustices. So I will shortly share my screen, a video of climate change through art and dance. But in the meantime, I'm gonna share concerning the Lake Victoria region where I come from, and how the flooding have impacted the communities. So just a minute. I don't know if you're able to see the screen now. Sophie, are you able to see?
Yes, we are able to see the screen.
See my screen? Mm-hmm. Okay, please enjoy the short video.
We extended our visit in Lake Victoria to see what could be the root cause of flooding. The Lake Victoria Basin is the second largest in the world, supporting around 40 million ecosystem inhabitants. The devastation caused by the water level rise of Lake Victoria is worrisome. Thousands of inhabitants have been displaced from homes that have been occupied for several generations, and the threats for further displacements are real. Townships, schools, agricultural lands, and business centers are submerged in water. While visiting the lake basin, we observed rampant proportions. The scenario will likely worsen with the ongoing land use changes. We are now in Nyando, Kisumu County, where the Luo community are predominant inhabitants. Over the time lived and been engaged in fishing activity.
Ese es que yo.
Women, girls, and children are the most vulnerable people in the community. There is an urgent need to increase women's involvement in disaster risk reduction programs, as flooding is a gender-sensitive issue. This dance is in form of a story of a young boy who was happily playing with his fellow friends in a nearby forest next to a river. Suddenly, it started raining heavily. By bad luck, the young boy was left behind. And within a span of minutes, this young boy drowned. After some time, he got rescued by the neighbors. What should we learn about flooding impacts to children? Children see and feel things differently, and we feel that it is important that they need to be heard. Therefore, there is need for great flood awareness, as children's reaction is a sign of a warning. And then concerning what we came to do here on communicating the impact of climate change through art and dance, how did you find today's interaction between the modern dancers from the student community in University of Eldoret and Moi, and also the Maasai women and men and children who played amazing songs and dance?
This is one of the best encounters I've ever had.
Yeah.
I've done this for the last maybe 10 years, but I've never engaged my community with the outside baby communities, like having students or other communities perform, and then the Maasai performing. As from me, this was amazing. I wish I knew it before. I could have done it before, but now that we have met and we know, it's a beginning of many others. And from the people that were watching, each one of them said it was best.
In other words, thanks to the Planetary Health Alliance for offering an opportunity for a festival event to be showcased at the annual meeting, which will be occurring on the 25th of April to 30th. And I will be happy to share these moments with the community interactions to the global community, so that they can learn from the Maasais from Kenya, and we see how we can engage the local communities more in the issues of tackling planetary health and also climate change crisis, which is really something that is serious and we need to act now.
Thank you so much. I hope you've learned a lot from my shared video. And in conclusion, I would like to encourage everyone to engage the community in climate change. We need to save our planet. That's my plea. Please, for this day.
Thank you so much, Melvin. I don't really have many words that can really describe the emotions right now, but we really do appreciate your testimony, and hopefully the words that came out of the video that came out from you yourself, we can raise the voices and hopefully make a difference together. I think with that, we'll come on to the listeners now as well. We can hopefully reflect on these stories that we've just heard, including the one we just heard now. So just as a reminder, our two listeners today are in the session, are Noemi and Tamam. I mentioned them earlier, but just to reiterate, Tamam is a Syrian physician and managing director of the Global Health Center in the Graduate Institute in Geneva. He also worked with the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement and Doctors Without Borders as well. Noemi is part of the Kichwa Sarayuki people in the Ecuadorian Amazon region. She's been active in the struggle for her territory since the age of 13 years old, and is now the health leader, education leader in the community as well as the president of the Women Association of Sarayuki, Kuranamba. She's also a part of the Amazonian Women Defending the Jungle as well. So I'll open it up to you guys now to hopefully give us some reflections on these testimonies.
I don't know how to follow that. Thank you for having us. There has been a mention in the beginning of the first session of listeners as leaders listening, and I want to just, in my own personal case, see the pretense of leadership of anything. If we serve any purpose, it would be to be able to share what we have and what we learn. Today, there has been plenty of talk about how people's health is affected. And just a couple of observations. There has been a mention of genocide and ecocide, and that has come from people who have lived through their experiences in indigenous communities that have seen and borne the brunt of the ecological, the climate crisis, but also the health crisis. I've had the luxury and the privilege of working with many communities and standing on the bedside of people who suffered exactly those. And in 20 years of my career, most of it hasn't been obvious to me. I have entered this field from a Western biomedical angle and have been conditioned by this humanitarian charity philanthropy way of thinking about the world, whereby in my head I was making things better, and I realize now that we may have been co-opted to make this system of exploitation and destruction more palatable to others. And for that, I don't know if an apology would work. But there has been also talk about mutual aid and about people helping each other. Patty in the first session talked about people supporting each other before and during crisis, and that is the humanitarian aid that will survive and continue when the taps from the West stop being useful or effective. The genocide and ecocide that has been happening, continues to happen, is I can't think of it except within a framework of what several Latin American philosophers and thinkers talked about in terms of epistemicide. There has been an effort, consistent and continuous, to make knowledge that comes from places in the world that aren't the West irrelevant, tribal, ethnic, relative, inapplicable. When we talk about medicine or healing or health today, the immediate image that comes to mind is that of a Western hospital. And all of us have failed to see health and medicine as an emancipatory effort. And I'm sorry. And I've accepted to apply to people the medicine that is foreign to them, despite their wishes and desires, and that has to change. Medicine has been part of exploiting people for a very long time, and it needs to become part of liberating them. It needs to be part of taking off the effort to control and direct people when they are vulnerable, when their health is at risk. And it cannot happen without us, all of us, people who are affected first and people who help them second. Rejecting this, like, rejecting the fact that we know what's better for people than themselves. I stand today and humbled by all that was talked about. I've been in Papua New Guinea, just across the artificial border from Western Papua, and I've sat in a hospital that is in an eyesight from an Australian mining company that has allowed people to come there for a month and leave for a month as they exploit the land of the people that we were trying to help without much success. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa that have been repeatedly exploited, repeatedly subjected to politics that allow people to fight each other instead of their exploiters. And we've looked for ages what is called the social determinants of health, as if poverty and hunger and lack of education come from a void, as if there hasn't been hundreds of years of history that made it inevitable that exploitation and hunger and poverty cannot not happen. So we sit today and we watch again as the neoliberal onslaught continues to strip everything there. And for once, this is the first day that I'm actually hopeful in a very long time. And I thank you for that. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, Tamam. I think at least here I can see the whole room is moved by all these statements, all these reflections, all these testimonies that we're hearing. I'll give the space again. I'll pass it over to Noemi now to talk about your reflection, if that's okay. Noemi, can you hear us?
Sí. Sí los estoy escuchando. Sí.
Sí,
Sí,
muy
Noemi.
bien, Noemi. Gracias.
Ahora no les escucho a ustedes.
Noemi, es su turno de hablar sobre el testimonio como oyente, sobre los testimonios que escuchó. Usted le toca.
Se refieren a mí porque yo no escuché la primera parte, estaba silencio lo que ustedes hablaban. ¿Me puede volver a repetir?
Le toca a usted hablar sobre la reflexión de la sesión. Sí, usted habla ahora.
Ya. Sí, he estado mirando sintiéndome cerca, con muchos, cerca a lo que está pasando allá donde ellos, siento como que estuviera pasando nosotros y con mucho dolor para muchos lugares en el mundo que está pasando. Es prácticamente algo preocupante. ¿Cómo es que los gobiernos no pueden darse cuenta de lo que está pasando en el mundo, en nuestra sociedad, en las comunidades y todo este cambio climático que se dice ya están viviendo en todos los rincones de las comunidades, en todas partes? Se ve claramente cómo ha venido afectando a las personas, el dolor que está dando a las personas, el sufrimiento, cómo afecta la salud, la economía. Todo esto es muy grave lo que está pasando en la sociedad y los gobiernos tienen que tomar esto con seriedad. No es algo que está pasando por una semana. Esto va a continuar empeorándose. Ya en muchos lugares ya ha empezado. Y hemos empezado nosotros en Ecuador. Tal vez otros aún no lo sientan, pero cada vez muy dura la vida. No no porque nosotros lo estamos haciendo esto, sino por tantos cambios climáticos que existen, por tantas empresas que no piensan más que en sacar producción para buscar una economía y no piensan en la destrucción de la humanidad, de los pueblos que existen, de los niños que lloran, de la gente que sufre de la enfermedad, de la necesidad económica, no solo en dinero, sino de los cultivos que se destruyen, la vida, la salud que se destruye de los pueblos. Entonces, para mí esto, como alguien que soy de una comunidad pequeña, donde vivimos de la agricultura, de la cacería, de la pesca, de los cultivos, me he sentido tan así queriendo llorar, adolorida en el corazón, que no somos los únicos, unos mejores que otros, pero la vida parece la misma en cada lugar. En Brasil, yo me identifico porque nosotros hemos vivido algo parecido, con unas pequeñas diferencias en forma de organizar, la forma como cuentan, que tenemos que unirnos, es muy cierto. ¿Cómo lo vamos a poder unir esto? De todos los que han expuesto, han orado aquí, ¿cómo vamos a unirnos? ¿Cómo vamos a llevar este mensaje a los gobernantes que están a nuestras cabezas, que están llevando un país, que están en la mano de los gobernantes, está la vida de todos estos pueblos, de todos estos lugares donde nosotros vivimos, hemos vivido pacíficamente, tranquilos, sin preocuparnos de todo lo que actualmente está pasando, sin mucho estrés, sin necesidad de estar pensando que por qué sucede.
About why this is happening. And they were dedicating to agriculture, to fishery, and now we have to think about why are there no longer any fish? Why are there inundations, floodings? Why is agriculture so difficult? We have economic hardships, and these are created by all these companies which have not been responsible or have not considered that the world is not just to be exploited, not just the world, not the landscape is not just an economy. For many spaces, the economy is in its own community, and they have destroyed this for these communities. They have exploited our economies, which has always existed. The industries, for example, wood or petrol industries or mining industries, hydroelectric industries have intervened, have exploited our spaces, and they have destroyed the economy which has served in our communities through solidarity, through meetings, speaking to each other, through mutual support and knowledge. When it comes to medicine, for example, or related to the economic topics. So all of this has been destroyed, and now we as people are left with all these hardships in our communities, in our spaces. We are left with all this hardship, and they are not looking for the solution for us. There is the climate change, and this has now converted and has been provoked by the irresponsible people who have not been considered as communities. So humans have only seen our spaces as production sites, development for the humanity, but this destruction for ourselves is what this has brought. And this brings me to argument some points to be able to reflect and discuss within our organization. We all live through the same situation. The situations are more or less the same, with a few small differences, as I've already mentioned. In some parts, small countries, in some communities, some bigger communities, there are the same problems, and we have to come together now. Now is the time to come together in some way. I don't know what could help us in coming together, to mobilize ourselves and to be able to get all these messages and everything that is happening across, that the world knows it, that the kids in the schools know about it in all parts, that everyone knows about what is happening, why families which are living peacefully do not know what is happening. So this is our task, is as involved people in this fight, is getting this message across to our governments through education, and that we also reach schools, universities through education, and that even every small kid can learn about what is happening. So it depends here from the education. That's the most important thing. How can we step by step educate people in the entire world? That would be my reflection on this.
¿Me están escuchando?
Can you hear me?
Yes. I'm failing a bit to find the words. Thank you so much for the testimonials, for sharing your struggles, your pain, but also your resistance with us. And I hope that we all know, and we are all in the struggle together, and that we can fight this together. Just a big thank you to our interpreters who are making it possible to share the space across language barriers. I'm just gonna read their names real quick, so to give them a shout out for the fantastic work they're doing. It's Alejandra Inda, Claudia Soto, Nicole Neubauer, and Nani Matteo. Thank you so much for making it possible for us to share the space. We will be back at 2 for session 3. I realized that this has been quite a tough and session for many of us. So I hope you can talk to someone in the break. I hope you can find a place for reflection. If you need support, feel free to reach out to us. And please know that we are in the struggle together. Yeah. See you at 2, or have a good day, and thank you so much for all that you've been sharing with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.